The 2000s were some of the best times on Nickelodeon, from things like Good Burger to Keenan and Kel and all that, and then shows like The Amanda Show, Drake and Josh and Zoe 101, and then eventually iCarly, Victorious, and Sam and Cat. And all of those shows and movies had one thing in common. They were all on Nickelodeon. Oh, and they were also made by Dan Schneider, resident Nickelodeon foot expert and overall creep. For the better part of 2 decades, Dan Schneider was basically Mr. Nickelodeon, making all of his shows and movies under Schneider's Bakery. And overall, all of the shows were absolute successes. Okay, maybe not Sam and Cat, but everything else was a success, okay? But for every hit show that Dan Schneider produced, came a slew of controversies from its cast and crew about Dan Schneider and his behavior on set. This week, we'll be going deep into the Schneiderverse I think I'm so funny. This week, we'll be taking a deep dive into the Schneiderverse and going over a bunch of the shows that Dan Schneider created, and looking into the strangeness of the shows and also the controversies surrounding the shows. So to start, let's take a look back at some of the Footmaster's earliest Nickelodeon work, The Amanda Show, which I think was Nickelodeon's attempt at SNL, and it kind of worked. The show was very popular with the network, and it eventually gave way for 2 other young actors from the show to rise and have their own show, which we'll go over later. But the focal point of this show was Amanda Bynes, who was probably one of the funniest parts of the show as well. However, now, a lot of these controversies surrounding Amanda Bynes happened after the show aired and well after her time on Nickelodeon, but I can't help but think that this was the start of Dan Schneider's reign of harassing employees. So in what would almost become a tradition under Schneider's Bakery, Dan Schneider took actors from one show, put them in a new show, and that show was a success too. Hailed as one of the greatest Nickelodeon sitcoms ever, Drake and Josh heavily relied on Drake Bell and Josh Peck's back and forth that they really honed in on The Amanda Show that Dan Schneider fully took advantage of.
Yeah, I just gotta go down and get the Doritos. Drake? What? Where's the door hole?
Oh, and also the talents of a young Miranda Cosgrove, who we'll be talking about later again. And looking into a lot of the allegations and controversies surrounding Dan Schneider, I couldn't really find any specifically about Drake and Josh. Josh Peck has come out a couple of times and said that he was never felt uncomfortable on any of the Drake and Josh sets. But Drake Bell had a mental breakdown, and him and Josh don't talk anymore, and now he makes Spanish music under Drake Campagna, and I feel like that's worth saying. Anyway, following the tradition of that I forgot Zoe 101. So Zoe 101 was a show that was on around the same time as Drake and Josh, but I wasn't allowed to watch as a kid because my father told me it was too girly. So instead I got to watch South Park as a kid, which now explains why I can't shut the up and stop swearing at 24. Anyway, Zoe 101 revolves around Zoe, played by Jamie Lynn Spears, sister of short-form poster Britney Spears, and her friends, one of whom is played by Victoria Justice. If you're following Dan Schneider's Krabby Patty secret formula for how to stay in power at Nickelodeon, this is how. No boy was this show controversial. The biggest controversy surrounding this show that people will probably point their fingers to is the fact that Jamie Lynn Spears got pregnant at 16 during the show, and that's why they canceled the show. But a quick Google search will actually tell you that the show had finished filming before Jamie Lynn Spears announced her pregnancy, so she wasn't pregnant while filming the show. It was just canceled. Or wrapped, I guess. The true controversy, however, comes from claims and allegations made against Alexa Nicholas. God, I hope I didn't butcher that. Now, these claims allege that Jamie Lynn Spears and Britney Spears both jointly bullied her off set, and that Dan Schneider was just okay with it. Oh, and on top of that, she claimed that on multiple occasions Dan Schneider tried to solicit feet pic from children, and I just feet are one thing, but children are a whole different, that's disgusting. So moving on from all the creepy feet shit, let's get into 2 shows that happened later after those original shows that were even weirder than the original shows they came from. Taking from the Dan Schneider secret. Why did that get censored? I just said. Okay, hold on. Nick? A nader. Okay, we got this. God damn it! Anyway, the 2 shows are iCarly and Victorious. Son of a. Anyway, iCarly's going to be the focus of this discussion because I've already made an iCarly video, and I want to make a Victorious video, so I don't want to reuse content, so you can go yourself. Anyway, the main controversy here is surrounding Dan Schneider and Jeanette McCurdy, one of the stars in the show who played Sam Puckett. There's a whole bunch of different allegations surrounding Jeanette McCurdy's claims against Dan Schneider, and a lot of it to that end goes in depth in her book, where she refers to him purely as the creator, which, if you look, Dan Schneider is the creator of iCarly, so that it just makes sense. But just to go over a couple here for the audience, they made Sam Puckett, the character, a heavy eater while also critiquing Jeanette McCurdy's figure, causing Jeanette McCurdy to have an eating disorder. As alleged in the book, the person known as the creator, who we just discovered was Dan Schneider, gave the kids unsolicited underage alcohol and then gave them unsolicited shoulder massages. And there's just so much wrong with everything I just said. And to briefly go over Victorious, which is a show that is also set in the same universe as iCarly, which I found weird because Victoria Justice, Daniela Monet, and Leon Thomas were all characters on iCarly previously, but then they did an iCarly crossover with Victorious, and I'm going on a tangent. Victorious follows Victoria Justice's character, Tori Vega, who gets a scholarship to this nice performing arts high school that her very less talented sister goes to, which didn't make sense to me at the time and still doesn't make sense to me now. But her and her talented pals go on a bunch of adventures as a gang, and I just want to go over some of the episodes so you really get what I'm trying to say here. Oh, also, one of the characters is a puppet, and he's the best part of the show. Just side note there. So there's an episode that takes place in a heat wave where all of the children basically strip down to their bikinis and underwear, which I can only assume was Dan Schneider's idea, and an episode that revolves around fish that clean the dead skin off your feet. And there's an awful long focus on the feet of these characters. And once again, I beg you to just think that this was Dan Schneider's idea. So when both those shows ended, or were canceled, because I guess Victorious was canceled, but I really thought it was hitting its stride in the third season, Dan Schneider did, in classic Dan Schneider fashion, what he did with every show. He took pieces from both shows, combined them, and made them into one show, Sam and Cat, which was bad. I mean, like, some of it was good, but not really, though. But even more claims from Jeanette McCurdy had come out after this show, mostly about her treatment compared to the treatment of Ariana Grande, but not faulting Ariana Grande for it, so much so as Dan Schneider. And honestly, I completely forgot that this show existed because it didn't really have any significant character development for any of the characters that I had loved in the previous shows, and I just didn't care, and it was on for like 2 seasons, and like, who cared? So you're probably asking, Keith, what happened to Dan Schneider after all these allegation claims? Well, when they started coming out in the late 2010s, he eventually was let go from Nickelodeon after 20 years with the company, because there was just an onslaught of claims, both verbal and sexual harassment, general abuse allegations from staff and crew, and just enough to fire somebody. Like, more than enough to fire somebody. Like, so many feet comments. Jesus Christ, was he a creep. And even in the last 5 years since his firing from Nickelodeon, there have been more claims and allegations stacking up from former cast and crew from shows and movies that he worked on while on Nickelodeon. And now that I've done more research than I'm comfortable admitting on camera about Dan Schneider and all these allegations, I don't think that I'll ever be able to watch a TV show or movie from the 2000s Nickelodeon era the same ever again. Thank you all so much for watching. I know this video was heavily requested by a lot of you, so make sure to show some love in the comments, and check out last week's video about reboots where I talk about the iCarly reboot right there. That's it for this week's Stop in the Knowledge Corner. I'll see you next week.